The bank alert buzzed on my phone at 11:47 p.m., just as I was closing my laptop after another 14-hour day of tax season prep work. The notification made my blood freeze. Account withdrawal, $3,200. Available balance, $247.33. $3,200, our entire tax refund, gone. I stared at the screen, my coffee mug frozen halfway to my lips. We'd been planning to use that money to finally renovate the bathroom, maybe take a small vacation. Sarah had been excited about it for weeks, constantly showing me Pinterest boards of tile designs and talking about how we deserved to treat ourselves after years of careful budgeting. "Sarah?" I called toward the bedroom, my voice carefully neutral despite the ice forming in my chest. "Can you come here for a second?" My wife appeared in the doorway of our home office, wrapped in the silk robe I'd bought her for Christmas. Even at nearly midnight, she looked perfect. Not a hair out of place, makeup still flawless from whatever she'd been doing all day while I worked a 12-hour shift at Henderson and Associates. Her blonde hair caught the lamplight, and for a moment, she looked like the college girl I'd fallen in love with 8 years ago. "What's wrong, honey?" Her voice carried that practiced sweetness that used to make my heart skip. Now, something about it felt manufactured, though I couldn't put my finger on why. I turned my phone toward her, the harsh light illuminating both our faces. "Did you withdraw money from our account today?" Something flickered across her face. So quick I almost missed it. Fear, guilt? But then her expression shifted to confusion. So perfectly performed it could have won an Oscar. "Oh, yes, I'm sorry. I should have texted you." She moved closer, perching on the arm of my chair with the casual intimacy of 6 years of marriage. "The car started making this horrible grinding noise this morning. I had to take it to Peterson's Auto, and they said it needed immediate attention or the engine could seize." My eyes moved automatically to the window where her Honda Civic sat in our driveway, looking perfectly normal under the streetlight. No tow truck marks, no indication of recent mechanical drama, no oil stains or any evidence of a car that had nearly suffered catastrophic engine failure. $3,000 for car repairs? I kept my voice level, but my hands were starting to shake. In my line of work, I'd seen enough financial fraud to recognize the signs. "That's more than the car is worth, Sarah." I know. Sarah's hand landed on my shoulder, her touch warm through my shirt, and I fought the urge to flinch away. "But you know how Peterson is. He always overcharges. And I panicked when he said the engine might die completely. I didn't want to bother you at work. You've been so stressed with tax season." The lie sat in the air between us like a poisonous cloud. In 6 years of marriage, Sarah had never once made a major financial decision without calling me first. She'd called me to ask about buying a $20 throw pillow just last week, worried about whether we could afford it. She'd called me from Target to ask if we needed the name-brand laundry detergent, or if generic was okay. She'd called me about a $5 coffee at Starbucks because she wasn't sure if it fit our budget. But $3,000? She'd just decided on her own? "Where's the receipt?" I asked, my accountant's brain automatically demanding documentation. Another micro-expression. This one definitely panic. "Receipt?" "For the repairs. Insurance will want documentation for a claim this large." "Oh, right. It's in my purse. In the car. I'll get it tomorrow." She kissed the top of my head, and her lips felt cold against my scalp. "I'm exhausted. Coming to bed soon?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. She disappeared back into the bedroom, and I heard the soft click of the door closing. Then I heard the sound that made my blood run cold. Her phone buzzing with text notifications, multiple notifications, at midnight. I opened my laptop and logged into our bank account with shaking fingers. The withdrawal had been made at 2:17 p.m. at the downtown branch on Riverside Avenue, a branch I'd never been to, nowhere near Peterson's auto shop. The transaction was labeled as a cashier's check, not a debit card payment for automotive services. Peterson's Auto was on the north side of town, a 20-minute drive from our house. The downtown branch was on the south side, near the government district, near the courthouse. My hands moved without conscious thought, pulling up Sarah's location history on our shared Google account, a feature we'd set up years ago for safety, so we could find each other in emergencies. At 2:17 p.m., when our money had been withdrawn, Sarah had been at the Riverside County Courthouse. The courthouse. Why would my wife need $3,000 in cash at the courthouse? I spent the next hour digging through public records, cross-referencing recent court cases, my accountant's mind automatically organizing data and looking for patterns. The Riverside County court system was surprisingly transparent online, and it didn't take long to find what I was looking for. Derek Williams, case number CV 2024 3847. DUI charges from 3 months ago. Court fines and fees totaling $3,247. Derek Williams, my former best friend from college, my best man at our wedding. The guy who'd introduced me to Sarah at a fraternity party 8 years ago. The same Derek who'd been too busy to hang out for the past 6 months, always making excuses when I'd try to plan our usual monthly poker night or weekend fishing trips. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred together, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. Then, I walked to the kitchen on unsteady legs, poured myself 3 fingers of whiskey from the bottle we kept for special occasions, and started planning how to confront my wife about paying another man's court fines with our tax refund. I had no idea I was about to discover something so much worse. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that bank transaction. Every time I tried to rationalize it, maybe it was a coincidence, maybe Derek had asked her for help as a friend, maybe there was an innocent explanation. My mind came back to one unavoidable fact. My wife had lied to my face about where she'd spent our money. At 3 a.m., I gave up pretending and crept back to my office. Sarah's soft breathing from the bedroom told me she was sleeping peacefully, the sleep of someone with a clear conscience, or someone who'd gotten very good at compartmentalizing guilt. Our shared iPad sat on the charging dock, and I grabbed it with trembling hands, settling into my desk chair. Sarah always forgot to log out of her messages, a habit that had never bothered me before. We'd always had an open phone policy in our marriage. Nothing to hide, we'd told each other proudly. When friends complained about their partner's secrecy, now I felt like a detective investigating a crime scene. Her text thread with Derek was right there at the top of her messages, and seeing his name made my stomach lurch. My finger hovered over it for a long moment before I tapped it open, my heart hammering so loud I was sure it would wake Sarah. Derek, did you get it? Sarah, just left the courthouse. All taken care of. Derek, you're an angel. I owe you everything. Sarah, just promise me Marcus will never find out. Derek, your secret is safe with me, beautiful. The messages were time-stamped yesterday at 2:43 p.m., 26 minutes after she'd withdrawn our money. 26 minutes after she'd paid another man's court fines while I was at work, believing my wife was probably at home reading or watching Netflix. Beautiful. He'd called her beautiful. I scrolled up with shaking fingers, my heart sinking with each message as weeks of increasingly intimate conversation unfolded. Flirtatious texts that made my skin crawl. Complaints about me being emotionally unavailable and obsessed with work. Derek calling her baby and gorgeous. Sarah sending photos of herself. Photos I'd never seen. Photos taken in our bedroom. In the lingerie I'd bought her for her birthday. And then, buried in 3 weeks of messages that read like love letters, I found the text that shattered my world completely. Sarah, I can't keep taking money without him noticing. The tax refund will be the last time, I promise. Derek, I know this is hard, but once I get these legal issues sorted out, we can figure out our next step. You know I love you. Sarah, I love you too. I just wish things were different. I read it again, then again, the words blurring as my eyes filled with tears I hadn't realized were falling. The phrase "last time" echoed in my head like a gunshot. Last time? This wasn't the first time? I stumbled to the filing cabinet and pulled out our bank statements with shaking hands, spreading them across the desk like evidence at a trial. My trained eye picked up the irregularities immediately. Cash withdrawals I didn't remember making, transfers to miscellaneous expenses that had no backup documentation, little discrepancies I'd dismissed as Sarah being careless with record-keeping. February, $800 withdrawn, labeled car maintenance. I remembered asking about it, and Sarah saying she'd gotten an oil change and some minor repairs. January, $1,200 transferred to checking, then immediately withdrawn as cash. Sarah had said it was for Christmas presents for her family. December, $600 emergency fund withdrawal. A plumbing issue, she'd said, though I'd never seen any evidence of plumber visits. Going back further, the pattern became crystal clear. For 6 months, Sarah had been systematically draining our accounts. Small amounts, careful amounts, amounts just below my usual attention threshold, scattered across different categories so they wouldn't trigger my accountant's instincts. All of it going to Derek. I pulled up Derek's court records again, cross-referencing the dates with our bank statements, his rent payments to avoid eviction, his lawyer fees for the DUI case, his probation costs, his car insurance to keep his license valid. Every single withdrawal corresponded to Derek's financial emergencies with mathematical precision. My wife wasn't just cheating on me. She was funding her lover's entire life with our money, our savings, our future. The bathroom renovation we'd planned, the vacation we'd dreamed about, the down payment we'd been saving for a bigger house. All of it had been transferred dollar by dollar to the man who was sleeping with my wife. The office door creaked, and I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. Sarah stood there in her robe, hair messy now, squinting at me in the lamplight. "Marcus, what are you doing up?" I looked at her, really looked at her. This woman I'd loved for 8 years, married for 6. This woman I'd worked 60-hour weeks to provide for, who'd complained about never having enough money while secretly funneling our savings to another man. This woman who'd stood beside me at our wedding and promised to love, honor, and cherish me, while apparently planning to do exactly the opposite. "I couldn't sleep," I said quietly, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. "Just thinking about the car repairs." She relaxed visibly, moving into the room. "Oh, honey, I know it's a lot of money, but we couldn't risk the engine dying completely. You know how expensive a total replacement would be." More lies. So easily told, so perfectly delivered. How long had she been lying to me? How many of our conversations had been performances? "Where's Derek living these days?" I asked, the question popping out before I could stop it. The question stopped her mid-sentence. I watched her face cycle through confusion, fear, and finally a kind of desperate calculation as she tried to figure out if this was a trap. "Derek? Why are you asking about Derek?" "Just curious. Haven't heard from him in a while. Used to be we couldn't get rid of the guy." "I wouldn't know," she said too quickly, her voice pitched slightly higher than normal. "We don't really talk anymore." Another lie. I had 6 months of text messages proving otherwise, messages that showed Derek had become the center of her world while I worked to pay for their relationship. Huh. I turned back to the computer, and minimizing the bank statements but leaving Derek's court record visible on the screen. "That's weird. I was just looking up some stuff about DUI laws for a client, and Derek's name popped up in the public records. Looks like he's had some legal trouble." Sarah went very still behind me, and when I glanced over my shoulder, She was staring at the screen with the expression of someone who'd just seen a ghost. "Oh," she whispered. "I didn't know." $3,247 in fines, I continued conversationally, watching her reflection in the computer screen. "Same amount as our car repair bill. What a coincidence." The silence stretched between us like a taut wire. I could hear Sarah's breathing, quick and shallow, could feel the tension radiating from her as she realized I wasn't as oblivious as she'd thought. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. "Marcus, I can explain." I turned around slowly, looking into the face of the woman I'd thought I knew completely, and realized I was looking at a stranger. "I'm listening." Sarah collapsed into the chair across from my desk like a marionette, with cut strings, and for the first time in months, I saw the real her. Not the perfect wife facade she'd been maintaining, but the exhausted, guilty, terrified woman underneath. "It started as nothing," she whispered, her hands shaking as she pressed them against her thighs. "Derek reached out about 6 months ago. He was having problems, needed someone to talk to. He said you were too busy to care about old friends anymore. So you became his therapist?" "It wasn't like that, at first." She looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes, and I could see her trying to find the words that would make this sound reasonable. "But you're never here, Marcus. You work constantly. 12-hour days, weekends, always stressed about clients and deadlines. I was lonely, and Derek, he listened to me." I felt a surge of familiar guilt, the same guilt she'd been using to manipulate me for months, apparently. The guilt of being the breadwinner, of working hard to provide for us, of sacrificing my personal time to build our financial security. But now I recognized it for what it was: emotional manipulation. "When did it become about money?" "His DUI happened in December. He lost his job because of it, couldn't afford a lawyer. He said he'd go to jail without help, that his life would be completely ruined. He was desperate, and I wanted to help a friend." "A friend you were sleeping with." The words hung in the air like a physical blow. Sarah's face crumpled, and she started crying. Ugly tears that smeared her makeup and made her look older, more fragile. "How long?" I asked when she didn't deny it. "Since January. 4 months. 4 months of coming home to kiss this woman, of making love to her, of planning our future together while she was planning her exit strategy with my former best friend. 4 months of intimate conversations about our dreams and goals while she was sharing intimate conversations with Derek about how emotionally unavailable I was." "Are you in love with him?" She was crying harder now, her whole body shaking. "I don't know, maybe. It's complicated." "It's really not." I stood up, my legs unsteady, feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach. "Either you love your husband, or you love the man you've been stealing from your husband to support. There's nothing complicated about that choice. I never meant for it to go this far. It just happened." Bullshit. The word came out harsher than I'd intended, but I was past caring about her feelings. "You made a choice every single time you withdrew money. Every time you lied about where you were going. Every time you came home and pretended to be my loving wife while you were texting another man." "I am your wife." "No," I said quietly, my voice deadly calm. "A wife doesn't steal from her husband to pay her boyfriend's bills. A wife doesn't lie about car repairs while she's actually at the courthouse paying another man's court fines. You're not my wife, Sarah. You're my wife's replacement, and you've been playing the role for months." Sarah wiped her nose with the back of her hand, leaving a streak of mascara across her cheek. "What happens now?" Before I could answer, my phone buzzed with a text message. The sender made my blood freeze and my hands clench into fists. "Derek, Thanks again for earlier. Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Marcus doesn't deserve you. I held up the phone so Sarah could see the screen, watching her face go white as she read the message. He's texting my phone, I said conversationally. Apparently you gave him my number by mistake when you saved his contact information. Marcus, please. No. I set the phone down and looked at my wife, my soon-to-be ex-wife. I'm done listening to lies. I'm done being the fool who works himself to death while his wife steals from him to support her lover. I walked to our bedroom and pulled out a suitcase, my movements mechanical and precise. Sarah followed, watching in horrified silence as I began packing my clothes with the same methodical approach I used for everything else in my life. Where are you going? Hotel. I'll be back tomorrow for the rest of my things. You can't just leave. We need to talk about this. We can work through... There's nothing to work through. I folded shirts with mechanical precision, my hands steady even though my world was falling apart around me. You made your choice. Multiple choices, actually. Now I'm making mine. I'll end it, she said desperately, moving closer, her voice taking on the pleading tone that had always worked on me before. I'll never see Derek again. I'll cut off all contact. I'll pay back every penny I took. With what money? I laughed, and it sounded bitter and foreign even to my ears. You've spent everything we had on your boyfriend. Our savings, our tax refund, probably our credit cards too if I dig deep enough. I'll get a job. You'll what, Sarah? Get your first job ever at 31? You don't even know how to write a resume. You've never filled out a job application. You've never had to support yourself for a single day in your entire adult life. The cruelty in my voice surprised me, but I couldn't stop. 6 years of supporting her, of encouraging her to find herself and pursue her passions while I worked myself to exhaustion. And this was how she repaid me. I know you're angry, she said, tears streaming down her face. You have every right to be furious. But we can fix this. We can go to counseling, and I'll do whatever it takes to rebuild your trust. I'll be completely transparent about everything. I don't want to fix this. I zipped the suitcase and faced her, seeing clearly for the first time in months. I want you to understand something very clearly, Sarah. This marriage is over. Tomorrow morning, I'm calling a lawyer. I started toward the door, but her voice stopped me cold. I'm pregnant. The words hit me like a freight train. I turned around slowly, the suitcase falling from my numb fingers. What? I'm pregnant, she repeated, her hand moving instinctively to her stomach. 8 weeks. My mind raced, calculating dates. 8 weeks ago would have been in January, right around the time she'd started sleeping with Derek. But we'd also been trying to have a baby then, before everything had fallen apart. It was one of the last times we'd been truly intimate before she'd started making excuses about being tired or stressed. Is it mine? The question hung between us like a landmine, ready to explode our lives even further. I think so. The timing works out. It has to be yours. You think so? I set down my suitcase and stared at her. You've been sleeping with 2 men, and you think the baby is mine. The dates work out, Marcus. I'm sure it's yours. But her voice was uncertain, wavering, and I could see the doubt in her eyes. She didn't know. My wife was pregnant, and she didn't know who the father was. The hotel suddenly seemed very far away. The simple solution of walking out and starting over suddenly became impossibly complicated. A baby. Possibly my baby. The family we'd been trying to build for 2 years, now contaminated by her betrayal, but still potentially mine. I picked up my suitcase again, but this time I couldn't make my feet move toward the door. My hand stayed frozen on the handle as my mind raced through the implications. If the baby was mine, could I really abandon it? If it wasn't mine, could I really raise Derek's child? If I stayed, could I ever trust Sarah again? If I left, would I spend the rest of my life wondering about the child that might have been mine? "I need time," I said finally, my voice hollow. "How much time?" I looked at this woman who'd destroyed our life together, who was carrying a child that might be mine, and felt something fundamental break inside my chest. "I don't know." I left her crying in our bedroom and drove to the Marriott downtown, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. The desk clerk didn't comment on the fact that I was checking in at 4 a.m. with red eyes and a single suitcase. In my sterile hotel room, I sat on the edge of the bed and tried to process what my life had become. Betrayed by my wife and my best friend. Stolen from systematically for months, possibly about to become a father to a child who might not even be mine. I thought about calling Derek, about confronting him directly. I thought about calling a lawyer immediately, about divorce papers and custody battles. I thought about calling my brother Jake, who'd warned me about Sarah from the beginning, but whom I'd dismissed as jealous. Instead, I opened the minibar, drank 3 tiny bottles of whiskey, and fell asleep with my clothes on, hoping that when I woke up, this would all have been a nightmare. I woke up 3 days later in a hospital bed, with Jake sitting beside me reading a magazine, and a doctor explaining that I'd driven my car off the Riverside Bridge at 70 miles per hour. "You're lucky to be alive," the doctor said. "The car rolled twice before hitting the water. Your seatbelt and airbags saved your life." But I wasn't feeling lucky. I was feeling like a man who'd lost everything and somehow survived to face the wreckage. The last thing I remembered was Sarah's face when she'd said she didn't know whose baby she was carrying, and the overwhelming sense that my life was over. Then everything went black. When I opened my eyes, everything was wrong. I was staring at the ceiling of our bedroom, not a hospital room. The familiar crack in the plaster above our bed. The morning light filtering through the curtains Sarah had picked out 2 years ago. No tubes, no bandages, no beeping machines. The weight beside me in bed was Sarah, sleeping peacefully on her side of the mattress, her blonde hair spread across the pillow. I sat up slowly, my heart hammering against my ribs. The last thing I remembered was the bridge, the feeling of weightlessness as my car went airborne, the strange sense of peace that had settled over me in those final moments when I'd accepted that everything was over. But here I was, in our bed, listening to Sarah's soft breathing and the familiar sound of our neighbor's dog barking in the backyard. A dream. It had to be a dream. The most vivid, horrible nightmare of my life, born from stress and tax season overwork and too much caffeine. I reached for my phone with shaking hands, checking the date. March 15th. March 15th, 8 months ago. 8 months before I'd found those text messages, before I'd discovered the stolen money, before everything had fallen apart. I was looking at a date from 8 months in the past, before Derek's DUI, before Sarah's affair, before the pregnancy scare. My hands were trembling as I opened our banking app, expecting to see the devastation I remembered. Instead, our checking account showed $8,247.33. Our savings account showed $15,000 even. The tax refund deposit was pending, scheduled to hit tomorrow. Everything was exactly as it had been 8 months ago, down to the penny. I stared at the screen until my eyes watered, my mind racing through impossible explanations. Amnesia from the crash. Coma dreams so vivid they felt real. Complete psychological breakdown. Some kind of time travel scenario that only existed in science fiction movies, but my body felt real. The phone in my hands felt real. The soft sound of Sarah breathing beside me felt devastatingly, undeniably real. I got up quietly, my legs shaky, and walked to the bathroom. My reflection in the mirror showed no scars from any accident, no signs of trauma. I looked exactly as I had 8 months ago except for my eyes. My eyes looked like they'd seen things no one should see. "Honey?" Sarah's voice came from the bedroom, sleepy and content. "You're up early." I walked back to the doorway and looked at her. She was sitting up in bed, hair messy from sleep, wearing the same blue nightgown she'd had on the night I'd discovered everything. But this Sarah looked innocent, trusting. Like a woman who hadn't yet betrayed her husband, who hadn't yet made the choices that would destroy our marriage. "Couldn't sleep," I said carefully, studying her face for any sign of deception. "Bad dreams?" "You could say that. Something like that." She patted the bed beside her with the same gesture she'd made 1,000 times before. "Come back to bed. You don't have to be at work for 2 hours." But I couldn't. Looking at her now, knowing what she was going to do, what she was probably already planning to do, made my skin crawl. Even if this was somehow real, even if I'd been given some impossible second chance, I couldn't just slip back into bed and pretend everything was normal. "I think I'll get an early start today," I said, forcing my voice to sound normal. "Big day coming up?" "Oh, right, the tax refund." She smiled, and I watched carefully for any hint of calculation in her expression. Any sign of the woman who would steal that money to pay another man's bills. "I can't wait to see how much we get back this year." There it was. The slight change in her tone when she mentioned money. The almost imperceptible brightening of her eyes. I'd missed it the first time, but now I heard it clearly. "Should be decent," I said neutrally, testing her. "Probably enough to finally get the bathroom redone like you wanted." Her smile faltered almost imperceptibly. "Oh, I thought maybe we could put it in savings, for emergencies." Emergencies. Like Derek's court fines that didn't exist yet but would in a few months. "We'll see," I said, and walked away to get ready for work. In the shower, I let the hot water run over me and tried to make sense of what was happening. Either I was having the most elaborate psychotic break in human history, or somehow, impossibly, I'd been given a second chance. A chance to stop the betrayal before it happened. A chance to protect myself and our money. A chance for revenge. By the time I got out of the shower, my hands had stopped shaking. By the time I got dressed, my mind was clear and cold and focused. If this was real, if I really had somehow returned to the past with full knowledge of the future, then Sarah and Derek had no idea what was coming for them. I kissed my wife goodbye, the same way I had 8 months ago, but this time I felt nothing but contempt for the performance. Then I drove to work, my mind already racing with possibilities. The first rule of accounting: always document everything. The second rule of accounting: never trust anyone with access to your money. It was time to apply both rules to my marriage. At work, I moved through my normal routine like an actor playing a familiar role. Same morning meeting with Henderson about the Morrison account. Same client calls about tax preparation deadlines. Same conversations with colleagues about March Madness brackets and spring vacation plans. But underneath the surface, I was planning. During my lunch break, I drove to First National Bank across town, a bank we'd never used, and opened a personal savings account under my name only. I transferred $7,500 from our joint savings, exactly half of what was there. Not enough to be immediately noticeable if Sarah checked, but enough to ensure she couldn't drain everything when the time came. "Any particular reason for the separate account?" the banker asked, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes. "Just want to diversify our holdings," I said smoothly. "My wife and I believe in having multiple banking relationships." Next, I visited Best Buy and purchased a small wireless security camera system, the kind designed for monitoring vacation homes. The sales clerk, an enthusiastic kid who looked barely out of high school, was helpful in explaining how to set up remote viewing through my phone. "These are really popular with guys who want to keep an eye on their houses while they're traveling for work," he said with a knowing grin. Or, make sure the kids aren't throwing parties when the parents are out of town. Something like that, I replied. On the way home, I stopped by Jake's apartment. My brother was 3 years younger than me, a freelance graphic designer who worked from home and had always been suspicious of Sarah. We'd grown apart over the years, partly because Sarah had never liked him. She said he was judgmental and negative, and partly because I'd been too proud to admit he might be right about her. Marcus? Jake opened the door looking surprised, pizza sauce on his MIT t-shirt and his dark hair sticking up at odd angles. What's up? You look different? Different how? Focused. Intense. It's weird. He stepped aside to let me into his cluttered living room, which was dominated by 3 large monitors and scattered with energy drink cans. Want a beer? Actually, yeah. We sat among his computer equipment and half-finished design projects, and Jake studied my face while I figured out how to begin this conversation. I need to ask you something, I said finally. Hypothetically. Oh boy, hypothetical questions are never good news. If you suspected someone of stealing from you, how would you prove it? Jake raised an eyebrow and set down his beer. Someone at work? Hypothetically. Well, hypothetically, I'd document everything. Dates, amounts, patterns. Set up surveillance if possible. Get solid evidence before making any accusations. Because once you accuse someone of theft, there's no going back. He paused, his expression growing more serious. This wouldn't have anything to do with your wife, would it? The question hit like a punch to the gut, even though I'd been expecting it. Why would you ask that? Because you've looked miserable for months, Marcus. You've lost weight, you're working even more hours than usual, and you get this haunted look whenever someone mentions Sarah. And now you're asking about theft. Doesn't take a genius to connect the dots. Jake leaned forward, his voice growing gentler. Talk to me, man. What's going on? For a moment, I considered telling him everything. About the messages, the money, Derek, the impossible fact that I was somehow living 8 months in the past with full knowledge of what was going to happen. But how do you explain something like that without sounding completely insane? I just have some concerns, I said carefully, about our finances. Some irregularities I've noticed. Sarah's been skimming? It wasn't a question. Jake said it with the certainty of someone who'd been waiting for this conversation for years. You know something. I know she's never worked a day in her life, but always has money for expensive clothes and spa treatments. I know she complains about being broke while carrying a purse that costs more than my monthly rent. I know she looks at you like you're a meal ticket, not a husband. The accuracy of his assessment was startling and painful. Why didn't you ever say anything? I tried, Marcus. Remember when you two got engaged? I asked if you were sure you knew who you were marrying. You told me I was being jealous and negative. Jake finished his beer and grabbed another from his mini fridge. You didn't want to hear it then, and I figured you'd have to learn the hard way. And now? Now you're asking me about financial theft, which means you're finally seeing what I've been seeing for years. Jake was quiet for a moment, then looked me directly in the eyes. You want my advice? Document everything. Get your financial house in order. Protect yourself legally. And whatever you're planning to do about it, don't tell her about it until you're ready to pull the trigger. Women like Sarah are dangerous when they're cornered. That evening, I installed the cameras while Sarah was at her Tuesday book club. A book club I now knew was actually drinks and increasingly intimate conversations with Derek at the Riverside Bar and Grill. I placed one camera in our bedroom, hidden behind a picture frame on the dresser. One in the home office, tucked behind a decorative plant. And one in the living room, concealed inside a fake book I'd bought years ago as a joke. Each camera was connected to an app on my phone that would alert me to any motion and allow me to watch live or recorded footage from anywhere. When Sarah came home at 9:30, I was sitting at my computer, ostensibly working on client files, but actually testing the camera system and setting up the monitoring software. "How was book club?" I asked without looking up, watching her in one of the camera feeds as she hung up her coat. "Good. We're reading some romance novel Margaret picked out. Lots of drama and angst." She kissed the top of my head, and I smelled unfamiliar cologne on her clothes, cologne I now knew belonged to Derek. "What are you working on?" "Tax prep for the Henderson Industries account. Speaking of which, our refund should hit tomorrow." "Oh, that's exciting. How much are we expecting?" I'd known she would ask, but hearing the eagerness in her voice, the same tone she'd use when checking lottery numbers, still made my stomach turn. "Around 3,000, maybe a little more." "Wow, that's more than we expected." No, it was exactly what she'd expected, because Derek had probably already told her exactly how much he needed for his court fines. They'd probably planned this weeks ago, sitting in some bar booth while I worked late to earn the money they were plotting to steal. "Yeah, we got lucky with some deductions." I closed my laptop and turned to face her, studying her expression. "What should we do with it?" "Whatever you think is best." But her eyes were calculating, already planning how to get her hands on that money. "I was thinking we should be more careful about our finances going forward," I said casually. "Maybe set up some automatic transfers to savings, so we're not tempted to spend everything." Her smile flickered like a candle in the wind. "That sounds responsible. And maybe we should look at getting separate bank accounts. Just for day-to-day expenses, you understand. It might make budgeting easier." Now her smile disappeared entirely. "Separate accounts? Why would we need separate accounts?" "Just to simplify things. You know how obsessive I am about tracking every penny." I kept my voice casual, but I was watching her face carefully, cataloging every micro-expression. "It would give us both more freedom to spend on personal things without having to justify every purchase." "I like our joint account," she said quickly, her voice pitched slightly higher than normal. "It feels more married, more like we're building something together." Of course she liked the joint account. Joint accounts were much easier to steal from. "It's just a thought," I said. "We can talk about it more later." But I could see the wheels turning in her head, could practically watch her recalculating her plans. She was already wondering how my suggestion would affect her ability to access Derek's money, already planning how to talk me out of any changes that would threaten her scheme. That night, as Sarah slept beside me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling and planning the systematic destruction of the two people who'd destroyed me. They thought they were so clever, so careful, so much smarter than the workaholic husband who was too busy to notice what was happening under his own roof. They had no idea they were about to face someone who knew their every move before they made it, someone who understood exactly how their plan would unfold because he'd already lived through it once. Tomorrow the real game would begin, and this time I was going to win. The tax refund hit our account at 8:47 a.m., just as I'd known it would. I was at my desk at Henderson & Associates when the notification pinged on my phone, but I didn't check it immediately. I already knew Sarah would see it first. She had notifications set up for all account activity, something I'd thought was responsible financial planning, but now realized was strategic monitoring. Sure enough, at 9:23 a.m., my phone rang with Sarah's number. "Honey?" Her voice was bright with false excitement, the same forced enthusiasm I'd heard 8 months ago. "Guess what just happened?" "What?" "The tax refund came in. It's even more than you said, $3,247. The exact amount Derek needed for his court fines. What a remarkable coincidence." "That's great news," I said, injecting enthusiasm into my voice. "We should celebrate." "Absolutely." Maybe dinner tonight at Romano's. Sounds perfect. But I knew she wouldn't be available for dinner. Not when Derek needed his money by the end of the week to avoid a warrant being issued for his arrest. I gave it exactly 3 hours. At 12:30 p.m., right when I'd predicted, my phone rang again. "Marcus, I'm so sorry, but something came up." Sarah's voice carried that carefully practiced note of regret, the same tone she'd used to cancel plans dozens of times over the past few months. "My car is making this horrible noise. I think I need to take it to the shop right away." "Really? It seemed fine this morning when you left for your yoga class." "It just started about an hour ago. Can you hear that?" She held the phone toward what I knew was our perfectly functional Honda Civic. That grinding sound? I listened to complete silence. "I don't hear anything." "It's really faint, but the engine sounds terrible. I'm worried it might be something serious, like the transmission or the timing belt." "Which shop are you taking it to?" A pause. Just like last time, she'd forgotten to script this part of the lie. "Peterson's," she said finally. "You know how reliable they are." Peterson's Auto was 20 miles north of our house. The courthouse where Derek needed to pay his fines was 15 miles south. She'd have to drive past 3 closer auto shops to get to Peterson's, but she'd chosen it specifically because it was far enough away that I wouldn't be tempted to drop by and check on the repairs. "That's a long way to drive with a potentially damaged engine," I said, playing my part perfectly. "I'll be very careful. I'll drive slowly and keep the radio off so I can listen for any changes." "This might be expensive, Marcus. You know how Peterson is with his rates." "How expensive are we talking?" "I don't know yet, but if it's the transmission, maybe a couple $1,000s?" And there it was, the setup for stealing our tax refund, delivered with the exact same script she'd used 8 months ago. Even her inflection was identical. "A couple thousand?" I let concern creep into my voice. "That's almost our entire refund." I know, but if the engine seizes up completely, we'll lose the whole car. And then we'd have to buy a replacement, which would cost so much more." "You're absolutely right. Car trouble isn't your fault, and we can't risk losing our transportation." I paused, as if making a difficult decision. "Do whatever you need to do. Our financial security is more important than holding on to that money." "Really? You're not upset about potentially spending the refund?" "Of course not, sweetheart. These things happen. Better to deal with it now than face a catastrophic breakdown later." I could hear the relief in her voice, the satisfaction of a con artist who thought her mark had just fallen for the scam. "You're the best husband ever. I'll call you as soon as I know more." But this time I was going to be ready for her. At 1:15 p.m., I left work early, claiming a family emergency that required my immediate attention. By 1:30, I was parked across the street from the Riverside County Courthouse in an old blue sedan I'd rented that morning specifically for surveillance purposes. At 2:17 p.m., exactly as before, Sarah's Honda Civic pulled into the courthouse parking lot. I watched through high-powered binoculars as she got out of the car, looking around nervously, like a criminal checking for witnesses before committing a crime. She was wearing the blue dress she'd bought last month, the one she'd claimed was for a job interview that had mysteriously never materialized. Now I understood it had been for Derek, purchased with our money to look good for her lover. She walked toward the courthouse building with purpose, carrying a manila envelope that undoubtedly contained our tax refund in the form of a cashier's check. She moved like someone who'd done this before, confident in her route and familiar with the process. At 2:43 p.m., she emerged from the courthouse and walked back to her car, and even from a distance, I could see the relief on her face. Mission accomplished. Derek's debt paid with her husband's money. Another crisis averted. Another month bought for their affair to continue. But this time, I had everything documented. Photos of her at the courthouse with timestamps. Video of her walking into the building with an envelope and coming out empty-handed. GPS data from my phone proving I was present to witness the theft. License plate numbers of other cars in the courthouse parking lot to corroborate the location and time. At 3:15 p.m., right on schedule, my phone rang. "Bad news," Sarah said, and I could hear the smile in her voice despite her words. "The engine needs major work. It's going to be expensive." "How expensive?" $3,000. Well, $3,200 actually, but I told them we could only afford $3,000 even, so they're cutting us a deal. Even her lies were exactly the same, down to the fictional discount from the imaginary mechanic. "That's our entire refund," I said, injecting disappointment into my voice. "I know, and I'm so sorry, Marcus. I feel terrible about this. But what choice do we have? The mechanic says if we don't fix it now, the repair costs will double or triple when everything completely breaks down." "No choice at all, I suppose. Go ahead and pay them." "I already did. I didn't want to risk driving home and having the engine die on the highway." "So you just walked into Peterson's auto with $3,000 in cash?" A longer pause this time, as she realized how implausible her story sounded when examined closely. "They have a very professional payment system," she said finally. "Everything is computerized and secure. They even gave me a receipt." "I'm sure they did. When will the car be ready?" "Tomorrow afternoon. Maybe the day after if they run into complications when they tear the engine apart." "And you're getting home how?" "I called an Uber. It's fine, really, just another $40, but worth it for the peace of mind." I watched her car pull out of the courthouse parking lot through my binoculars, heading not toward Peterson's auto, but toward home, where she'd probably spend the afternoon crafting more elaborate lies about her fictional car troubles. "Sarah?" "Yes." "Just out of curiosity, what's the name of the mechanic you spoke with?" Silence. Dead silence as she realized she hadn't prepared for this question. "The mechanic," I repeated patiently. "I'd like to call and thank him personally for the discount. It's not every day you find an honest auto shop willing to work with customers on price." "Oh, Mike Peterson." "Mike Peterson at Peterson's Auto?" "Right, that's him." "And he personally cut us a deal because you asked nicely?" "Exactly. He said he could tell I was really worried about the money, and he appreciates customers who've been loyal to his family's business." I hung up without saying goodbye and immediately called the real Peterson's Auto. "Peterson's, this is Dave." "Hi, Dave. This is Marcus Chen. My wife Sarah brought our Honda Civic in today for engine work, and I wanted to follow up on the repair timeline." "Honda Civic? Hold on, let me check our system." A pause. "Sorry, sir. We don't have any Honda Civic scheduled for today. No Sarah Chen in our system either." "Are you sure? She said she spoke with Mike Peterson about a transmission problem." "Sir, there's no Mike Peterson here. I'm Dave Peterson, and I've owned this shop for 15 years. It's just me and my two mechanics, Tommy and Rodriguez. Neither of them is named Mike." "And you haven't seen a 2018 Honda Civic today? Blue, driven by a blonde woman?" "No, sir, haven't seen anything like that. You sure you got the right shop?" "Must be a misunderstanding. Thanks for checking." I hung up and added Dave's testimony to my growing file of evidence. Then I sat back in my rental car and waited for Sarah to come home with her elaborate story about car troubles and helpful mechanics who didn't exist. This time I was going to let her dig herself in as deep as possible before I buried her in her own lies. But first I had some business to take care of. Derek Williams was about to discover what happened when you stole from the wrong person. I drove back to work and spent the rest of the afternoon making phone calls that would change Derek's life forever. The first call was to the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. I'd done my homework over the lunch break, researching Derek's employment history and financial situation. For the past 6 months, he'd been working under the table doing freelance IT work, jobs he'd found through online platforms and personal connections, all paid in cash to avoid tax reporting requirements. Meanwhile, he'd been collecting unemployment benefits by claiming he was actively seeking legitimate employment, but unable to find work due to his DUI conviction. The unemployment office had no idea he was actually earning unreported income, and the IRS had no idea he was working jobs that should have been reported on his tax returns. IRS Criminal Investigation, this is Agent Martinez. Agent Martinez, my name is Marcus Chen, and I'd like to report suspected tax evasion and unemployment fraud. What type of evidence do you have, Mr. Chen? Financial records showing unreported income, documentation of fraudulent unemployment claims, and evidence of systematic underreporting of taxable earnings. I'd spent my lunch break creating a comprehensive file of Derek's activities, cross-referencing his unemployment claim dates with social media posts that showed him working various IT jobs. Derek had been stupid enough to post photos of himself at client locations, celebrating completed projects and bragging about his technical skills, all while officially claiming to be unemployed. How did you become aware of this situation? The subject approached me about preparing his tax returns. When I reviewed his documentation and compared it to his claimed income, the discrepancies were obvious. I paused. As a CPA, I'm ethically obligated to report suspected fraud. Can you provide documentation? I'll email everything within the hour. My second call was to the State Unemployment Office Fraud Hotline. Unemployment Fraud Division. This is Mrs. Rodriguez. I need to report benefit fraud. I have documentation showing someone collecting unemployment while working unreported jobs. What's the claimant's name and social security number? I provided Derek's information, along with detailed evidence of his unreported work activities. The unemployment office took fraud very seriously, especially when it was as well documented as Derek's case. My third call was to Derek's former employer, Tech Solutions, Inc., where he'd worked as a systems administrator before his DUI conviction got him fired. Tech Solutions, this is Jennifer. I need to speak with your IT security manager about a potential data breach involving a former employee. Within minutes, I was connected to Robert Chang, the company's Chief Information Officer. Mr. Chang, this is Marcus Chen from Henderson and Associates. I'm calling about a security concern involving Derek Williams, who I believe was formerly employed by your company. Derek Williams? Yes, he was terminated several months ago following criminal charges. What kind of security concern? I've come across evidence suggesting he may have copied proprietary client information and system access codes before his termination. This information appears to be stored on personal devices that were later seized by law enforcement. I'd discovered this by carefully reading through Derek's court records online. Among the evidence listed in his DUI case was his personal laptop, which police had seized during their investigation. The evidence inventory included several files with suspicious names like TechSol_ClientDB_backup and admin access codes, files that no employee should have copied to personal devices. Jesus Christ, Chang muttered. Do you have copies of this evidence? I have screenshots of the police evidence inventory. I'd prefer to discuss this in person rather than over email. Absolutely. Can you come in this afternoon? I'll be there within the hour. My fourth and final call was to Derek's probation officer, a woman named Officer Torres, who supervised his post-conviction monitoring. Probation Office, Officer Torres speaking. Officer Torres, this is Marcus Chen. I need to report probation violations by Derek Williams. What type of violations? Unreported employment, unreported income, and failure to disclose his current living situation. I have documentation. Derek's probation terms required him to report all employment and income to his probation officer, maintain a current address, and avoid any illegal activity. His under-the-table work violated multiple conditions of his probation simultaneously. By 5 p.m., Derek Williams was the subject of 4 separate investigations. IRS criminal investigation for tax evasion, state unemployment fraud investigation, corporate espionage investigation by his former employer, probation violation review by the county. Each investigation would proceed independently, but they'd all converge on Derek at roughly the same time. Within 2 weeks, he'd be facing criminal charges, civil penalties, and potential prison time. But I still wasn't done with him. That evening, I drove home to find Sarah nervously pacing in our living room, checking her phone constantly and jumping at every sound. "Everything okay?" I asked, settling into my chair with a beer. "Fine, just tired." But she kept glancing toward the door like she was expecting bad news to arrive any moment. "How's the car situation?" "Peterson says they'll call tomorrow with an update." She fidgeted with her wedding ring, spinning it around her finger, a nervous habit I'd never noticed before. "They think the repairs might take longer than expected. That's frustrating. Good thing we have savings to cover the cost." "Right, good thing." But I could see the guilt eating at her. The stress of maintaining such an elaborate lie, while knowing Derek was probably texting her with updates about his mounting legal troubles. "Maybe you should go to bed early," I suggested. "You've been looking stressed lately." "I think I will." As Sarah got ready for bed, I sat in my office and reviewed the evidence files I'd been building. Photos, documents, financial records, government correspondence, recorded phone calls. Everything I needed to destroy both of them completely and legally. But this was just the beginning. Derek's world was about to collapse entirely. And Sarah's was about to follow. They thought they were so smart, stealing from me while I worked to support them both. They had no idea they were about to face someone who had turned intelligence into a weapon. 6 months later, Derek Williams was serving 18 months in county jail after pleading guilty to unemployment fraud, tax evasion, and violating his probation. The corporate espionage charges had been dropped in exchange for his guilty plea, but his professional reputation was destroyed. He had lost his IT certifications, been banned from working with sensitive data, and would be unemployable in his field for years. Meanwhile, Sarah's perfect plan had fallen apart completely. With Derek in jail and unable to continue their affair, she'd been forced to face the reality of what she'd done to our marriage. She'd moved out of our house and found a studio apartment above a laundromat, working as a waitress at a Route 9 diner to pay her bills. For the first time in her adult life, she was supporting herself. The divorce had been finalized 3 months earlier. Sarah had signed away any claim to our assets without argument, accepting responsibility for the theft and agreeing not to contest the proceedings. She'd also agreed to a payment plan to reimburse the money she'd stolen, though at her current income level, it would take her years to pay it back. But the most satisfying part wasn't Derek's imprisonment or Sarah's downfall. It was what I'd built in the meantime. Using my knowledge of future market trends, I'd built an investment portfolio that had returned over 400% in 6 months. Cryptocurrency investments made at exactly the right times. Real estate purchases in areas I knew would appreciate rapidly. Stock picks that seemed impossibly prescient, but were actually based on my memory of news events that had already happened once. I'd left Henderson and Associates to start my own financial consulting firm, Chen Investment Strategies, which had quickly become the most successful boutique investment company in the region. My supernatural ability to predict market movements had attracted high-net-worth clients who were eager to benefit from my insights. The Business Journal had featured me on their cover as Investor of the Year, and I'd been invited to speak at conferences across the country about market analysis and financial strategy. People who had barely acknowledged me when I was married to Sarah now treated me like a celebrity. Women who had dismissed me as boring now found me fascinating. The transformation was everything I'd wanted, but it had come at a cost I was only beginning to understand. I was sitting in my new office, a glass-walled space on the top floor of a downtown high-rise, when Jake knocked on my door. "Nice digs," he said, looking around at the expensive furniture and cityscape views. "You've done well for yourself." "Thanks. What brings you downtown?" "Thought you might want to know. I saw Sarah yesterday." I looked up from the financial reports I'd been reviewing. "Oh?" "She was at the grocery store. Looked different." "Different how?" "Thinner, tired, but not broken, if you know what I mean. More like focused." I nodded, but didn't comment. I'd seen Sarah a few times over the past months. Brief encounters at restaurants or public events where we'd acknowledge each other politely, but maintain our distance. "She asked how you were doing," Jake continued. "What did you tell her?" "That you were successful and seemed happy." "And?" "And she said she was glad. Said she hoped you'd found what you were looking for." I leaned back in my chair, considering this information. "Anything else?" "She's taking business classes at the community college. Accounting, apparently." That surprised me. Sarah had never shown any interest in business or finance during our marriage. She'd claimed that numbers bored her and that she was more of a creative person. Accounting. Night classes while she works days at the diner. Her manager says she's one of the best employees they've ever had. Reliable, hardworking, good with customers. Good for her. "Marcus?" "Yeah?" "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you'd handled things differently?" The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you got your revenge. Derek's in jail, Sarah lost everything, and you've built this amazing business. But do you feel satisfied?" I considered the question. Did I feel satisfied? I'd accomplished everything I'd set out to do. My enemies had been destroyed. My wealth had multiplied. My reputation had been rebuilt. By every objective measure, I'd won completely. So why did I feel so empty? "I feel vindicated," I said finally. "That's not the same thing as satisfied." Jake was right, but I wasn't ready to admit it. "They got what they deserved." Did they? Or did you become someone you didn't recognize in order to give it to them? After Jake left, I sat alone in my office looking out at the city below. Somewhere out there, Derek was sitting in a jail cell, probably wondering how his life had fallen apart so quickly. Somewhere else, Sarah was working a night shift at a diner, trying to rebuild her life from nothing. And here I was, successful beyond my wildest dreams, but wondering if the cost of my revenge had been worth it. That night, I drove past the diner where Sarah worked. Through the window, I could see her behind the counter, taking orders from late-night customers with quiet efficiency. She looked older, more mature, but there was something in her posture that suggested she'd found a kind of peace in honest work. As I watched, an elderly customer said something that made her laugh. A genuine, unguarded moment of happiness. It was the first time I'd seen her truly smile in over a year. I drove home to my empty house, poured myself a drink, and realized that revenge had given me everything I'd wanted, except the one thing I'd lost, the ability to feel satisfied with my life. 6 months later, I started the Marcus Chen Foundation for Second Chances, a non-profit organization that provided grants and support for people trying to rebuild their lives after major setbacks. We funded education programs, job training, transitional housing, and debt relief for people who were genuinely committed to starting over. I never contacted Sarah directly, but her name appeared on our list of grant recipients. She'd applied for educational funding to complete her business degree, writing a compelling essay about the importance of personal accountability and second chances. The review committee, which didn't include me, approved her application unanimously. She never knew I was involved, and I preferred it that way. It wasn't about helping Sarah specifically. It was about learning to build something positive instead of just tearing things down. 2 years after discovering Sarah's betrayal, I met Emma Rodriguez at a networking event. She was a marketing consultant with her own firm, intelligent and independent, and completely unimpressed by my financial success. What impressed her was my work with the foundation, my commitment to helping others rebuild their lives. Most people use their success to insulate themselves from other people's problems, she said over dinner on our third date. You use yours to solve them. Everyone deserves a second chance, I replied. Even people who betray you? Especially people who betray you. Revenge might feel good in the moment, but it doesn't actually heal anything. Sounds like you learned that the hard way. I did. Emma and I were married 18 months later in a small ceremony that focused on building something new rather than recovering from something old. The night before our wedding, she asked me if I regretted any of it. The revenge, the schemes, the systematic destruction of my first marriage. I regret how angry I became, I said. I regret letting someone else's betrayal define who I was for so long, but I don't regret the consequences they faced. What's the difference? The consequences were about justice. The anger was about me choosing to stay trapped in the past instead of building a future. And now? Now I know the difference between getting even and getting better. 5 years after Sarah used our tax refund for Derek's court fines, I had built a life that was better than anything I'd lost. A successful business, a loving marriage, meaningful work that helped others, and the wisdom that comes from surviving betrayal without letting it consume you. Derek had served his time and moved across the country, starting over in a field where his criminal record was less of a barrier. Sarah had completed her degree and become the manager of a successful restaurant, building a life based on her own efforts rather than someone else's support. We'd all learned, in our own ways, that the best revenge isn't destroying your enemies. It's building a life so good that their betrayal becomes irrelevant. Sometimes the best way to pay back your self-respect isn't to tear others down, but to build yourself up so high that their betrayal becomes just a footnote in your success story. Sarah used our tax refund for Derek's court fines. I used my freedom to pay back my self-respect. And in the end, I was the only one who truly won.